Many of you know that about 30 years ago, I walked from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. in the Great Peace March for global nuclear disarmament with about 400 of my closest friends. Actually, they became my closest friends during the walk. Here we are last summer at our 30th reunion in Iowa. Not all of us, of course, and there's a lot more gray hair in this photograph than 30 years ago. But about 29 years ago, a fellow marcher told me a story about something that happened shortly after the march. They were in Los Angeles. They were enjoying a beautiful sunset with some non-marchers. And this friend of mine had to point out that the beautiful reds and oranges of the sunset are caused by smog. That if there weren't so much smog in the air, the sunset wouldn't be anywhere near as beautiful. And this non-marcher friend who was there said, "It must really suck to be a political activist, because you can't just enjoy a beautiful sunset because you know too much. And you feel like every little problem has to be addressed because that's what you do for a living." This is a sermon about that. Speaking of smog, Joni Mitchel famously wrote and sang, "Then can I walk beside you? I have come here to lose the smog, and I feel to be a cog in something turning." Hold that thought. Skipping way off topic for a moment, if I say the words Jurassic or Cretaceous or Pleistocene, I think you know that I'm talking about geologic time, right? These eras and periods of the deep ancient past that geologists look at in the rock layers. Here's the 9th grade chart of geologic time, very boring, very straightforward. Here's a far more colorful and interesting one that I stole from the internet. And here's a really good artistic one that I actually have permission from the artist to use. So we have all these rock layers, and more recent is towards the top. And some environmentalists and geologists have proposed this idea that we are no longer in the Holocene, we are now in the Anthropocene, or as some people pronounce it, Anthropocene. And literally it means the time of man. And they propose this because we are so numerous and we're having such huge impacts on our environment, on the earth itself, that they say this may even show up in the rock layers millions of years from now. Now, the idea is kind of controversial because rock layers take a long time to build up, and millions of years can be squished down into this tiny, tiny little rock layer. Not very much. My wife is giving me signals. What's my problem? All right, raise your hand if you can't make out my words. What's that? Okay. Where was I? Oh, it's controversial. Rock layers tend to build up just offshore where sediments in the water hit slow water and they settle down to the bottom. So we can't really see the rock layers that are being formed right now. It's kind of controversial. A lot of geologists are saying, nah, we're not that big, never be that big. And climate change is pretty big, but the changes we make to the climate may last 1,000 or 2,000 years, which seems like a long time to us, but on the geologic time scale, it's nothing. It's a blip, a smear. However, we are having so many impacts in so many areas that it may make a substantial impact. One thing, radiochemical traces from the nuclear testing done in the 1950s, those are going to stick around for millions of years. Plastic, lots and lots of plastic is going to end up in those rock layers. We make 300 million tons of plastic every year. Where does it go? Well, some goes in landfills, but some accumulates in the oceans. There's this thing called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, sometimes also called the Pacific Trash Vortex. And this is a simulation. They released all these buoys, and they just see where the buoys go. If these were plastic particles, and they are, the ones that are disappearing are the ones that are settling to the bottom and becoming part of the rock layers. But there are also these patches in every ocean where they just go round and round, the floating plastic. Asphalt. Just think about all the asphalt we are laying down on the surface of the earth. That's not going anymore. It's everywhere, ubiquitous. One of the implications of climate change is that as we add more CO2 to the atmosphere, it dissolves in the ocean and makes the oceans more acidic. This is a simulation of if oceans get as acidic as we predict in the year 2010, what will happen to seashells? Now, the rock layer that we call limestone is made of seashells and coral. So if all or most of the seashells dissolve in the next few hundred years, there won't be any limestone, and that will be mighty curious to geologists millions of years from now. Coral reefs are supposed to look like this, but millions of acres of them now look like this. Extinctions. We are in the 6th great extinction on this planet. The others were caused by natural causes, and we'll talk more about that in a second. This is Wikipedia's list just of the macro, the big animals that we can see. There's no plants on this list. These are extinctions in recent years. It just goes on and on and on. It doesn't include anything that's microscopic or plants or anything like that. There will also be some very confusing local nonconformities in the rock layers that represent mines and mining. They're huge, some of them, what we are creating on the surface. Landfills, they're not going anywhere. Some of them they'll all get compressed some, but this landfill is not going to get compressed to the point where it's not visible millions of years from now. It'll still be there. So when I think about these impacts and all this just gross, disgusting stuff that we are doing, it makes me feel awful. Sometimes I wish we could go back to the Stone Age and live like those noble savages that we like to tell stories about. But we can't do that. We can't do that. That's good, isn't it? The reason we can't go back is because we're captives. We're captives of the civilization we live in. Daniel Quinn pointed out this beautifully in his book Ishmael. You've probably read it, some of you. We're captives. We're social creatures. So it's not going to work. We're not going to thrive and survive to try and live out in the middle of the woods as hermits somewhere. And there are no woods left that our civilization doesn't penetrate sooner or later. So Daniel Quinn calls us takers. We are takers as in civilization, take it or leave it. Our ancestors took it, joined it, so we are takers. And leaving is no longer an option. This civilization we live in is both our cage and the Earth's destroyer. So all this horrible stuff is happening on my behalf, and there's not a whole lot I can do about it except feel guilty. It's a little bit like being a white man in America. I feel guilty about the privileges that I have due to my position in society, but I can't change my race, and I can't opt out of civilization. I can't not be part of the problem, even as I'm working to be part of the solution. When we're talking about race, this way of thinking and feeling is called white guilt. I propose a similar term, taker guilt. The guilt that we feel about the harm we do just by being part of our civilization that is currently destroying the earth. But like white guilt, taker guilt is not helpful. It incentivizes us to focus on proving our innocence and for being penitent rather than working for true equality or working for solutions that are more sustainable when we're talking about the earth. Feeling awful is indulgent. Taker guilt lets us say, well, I'm still driving when I could bike to work, but it's okay because I feel bad about it. It pushes us to give up. I mean, don't we kind of say that sometimes? It pushes us to give up and, say, well, yeah, I'm using the clothes dryer when I could use the line, but, Chesapeake Energy is flaring millions of tons of methane every day, so what difference does it make? I'll use the dryer. And, I do this. I actually think this way sometimes. Maybe you do too. So, what's the antidote? Well, the flip side of white guilt is this concept of white privilege. It's an invitation to face facts, to acknowledge without guilt or shame that there's unfairness built into the very fabric of our society, unfairness that benefits me as a white man. To be authentic. It's an invitation to be authentic about recognizing that and moving forward humbly, focusing on what is working, putting our energy into what's promising and what's good. The same can be applied to taker guilt and civilization. If we face facts, we may be more effective in creating a sustainable future. Facts like, I am part of the universe. I'm part of this planet, part of the biosphere, part of the evolutionary process. So is everything else, no exceptions. I am not a cancer on this planet. I am this planet doing what this planet does right now in this part of its evolutionary life. The cancer is from seeing myself as separate from it, not from being present during that evolutionary unfolding. Look, when you see Hoover Dam, you've got a choice. You can see the drowned canyons and the salmon that can no longer get to their spawning grounds, or you can see a great feat of ingenuity by some very clever and exceedingly cooperative primates. This thing brought water and power to the middle of the desert. It's amazing. Both are true. There are harmful impacts from Hoover Dam being built, but it's also this really cool thing that we made, that the earth made, using us. When you look at the Seattle skyline, you can see crowding and a paradise paved over, or you can see a center of innovation and diversity and progress. When you think about the space program, you can say to yourself, yeah, now we're leaving our junk on other planets too, and we're launching weapons of mass destruction into a whole new frontier. It's true. But it's also a huge triumph of science and mathematics. Human beings, primates exploring the universe around them. Remember, the space program brought this world-changing and spiritually significant image of ourselves. It also brought this one, taken from near Jupiter. And this one, which reaches back 13 billion years into the past, and showed us that there are 400 billion galaxies in our family. The antidote to taker guilt is saying yes to all of it, to acknowledging the upsides and the downsides, but focusing on the big picture, the promise, the growing pains that tell us we're growing. To acknowledge, not obsess, but acknowledge that we are having harmful impacts, and we're going to move forward towards more sustainable solutions. Instead of saying, yeah, but, saying yes, and. Look, we're really good at this when it comes to babies. Let's see, I'm not going to click quite yet. Robin was born, our daughter was born when Ann and I were traveling. We were actually moving from Southern California to Ohio, and she was born on the way. That is a story for another time. But we pulled on the way. She was less than a week old, and we pulled into the Effingham, Illinois post office right at closing time. They were just about to close. We just wanted to buy some stamps. And we go in there, and the teller's like, it's time to leave, and sells us the last transaction of the day, sells us a couple books of stamps. And Robin chooses that moment to massively overflow her diaper all over me, on the floor, liquid, smelly, it was a mess. And these postal workers were incredibly gracious. They helped us clean it up, and they were so gentle and gracious. And we forgot the stamps we bought, and they mailed them. They mailed them to us using the address on our check a week later. My point here, somehow bathroom humor always finds its way into my talks. I'm not sure. Do you imagine when I looked at Robin as a baby that I was paying attention to her ability to squirt poop? No. When I looked at my child, I was looking at the promise of maturation, her ability to grow and interact with the world around her and make good choices for herself. Similarly, we have this global civilization, but our global civilization is not an infant. They've done surveys all over the planet, and the respondents, just normal people, respond, and what they say, at least 2/3 of them say, that our global civilization is in its adolescence. Civilization is a teenager. Think about that. Teenagers are reckless and tend to live without regard for the consequences of their behavior. They are hugely concerned with appearance and with fitting in, with material things. Teenagers prefer instant gratification. They tend to gather in groups or cliques and often express us versus them mentalities, in versus out thinking and behavior. Their brains, teenagers' brains, are completely rewiring themselves, establishing new connections and new patterns of connections. Teenagers are rebellious and pretend at their independence from family. Humanity's family of origin is the family of life, nature. By adulthood, most human teens, have started to realize that they are not independent from their families, and they start to value interdependence and connections with their families. It's like, how's he going to bring all these weird things in? So 4 times a year, British authorities actually they take down the fence surrounding Stonehenge and allow visitors to actually go in amongst the stones. And Ann and I were privileged to be able to do that a couple of years ago. And it was a high point for us, a major high point of our lives. However, some people were there to honor the ancient pagan rites of being among the stones and worshiping there. But a lot of people came as tourists like us, and unlike us, brought in 6-packs and you name it, they brought it in. And they left it on the ground. So we left as the party was just winding up, about 11 o'clock, I think, at night. We walked out of the site. And there was just trash everywhere. So I'm telling this story because our teenage civilization, even on the same day, can exhibit a great variety of maturity levels. But our civilization is part of nature. We are nature. We're one expression of nature. Nature is both hermit crabs and hyenas, pigeons and poison ivy, butterflies and black holes, cacti and cancer. Nature includes minerals and mines, oceans and oil spills. What we do and make is part of nature's process. It might be a destructive part, but it is part of it. It is a futile adolescent fantasy to believe we are separate from nature. Whether you think of us as noble achievers or cancerous destroyers, the truth is we are both and neither. Just like an adolescent boy who is socially awkward, painfully codependent, and believes he's going to be a rock star. That's me, by the way. That's how we behave. So, how do you raise a teenager? With active love. Firm, authentic, unrelenting love. Raise your hand if you've been in a relationship for more than 7 years, an intimate relationship. A lot of people. It's hard, right? There are upsides and downsides to being with this person. So go ahead, you can obsess over the toilet seat or the 50 pairs of shoes or how they drive or their taper manners, whatever it is, but you know that over the long run, that kind of obsession is not sustainable if you want the relationship to last. I know, I've been there. At about that 7-year mark, Ann and I realized that we needed some help. So we went to see a marriage counselor, and she made this really simple drawing that changed our lives and saved our marriage, for the first time at least. It's that simple Venn diagram, 2 circles that overlap. This represents the classical romantic relationship, and it's not a good model. These are not 2 whole people. This is symbolized by, the way we talk about relationships, you can see this. Yeah, I know, we're very short on time, sorry. These are not whole people. Well, I was going to say, we say things like, I gave her my heart, she completes me, she's my better half, he, whatever. You know what I'm talking about, all that romantic claptrap. If these people separate, one or both of them is going to go away a broken person. Because they didn't, 1 plus 1 in that case made about 1.5. You don't have two whole people there. She said, this is a healthy relationship right here. You have two whole people, each whole and healthy and independent, who choose to spend time together because they want to build something. They want to build a relationship or a marriage between them that unites them. Active love is feeding that central circle. Active love is making sure that relationship is whole and healthy without getting into the other person's personal business and without getting emotionally fused. This model of romantic relationships can be applied to other relationships as well. Think about how this would affect your relationship with your coworkers, or your boss, or your government. We have to feed the center circle in order to express active love. So in the case of a government, that means voting and showing up and calling your representatives, praising and protesting, marching and donating, but not becoming emotionally enmeshed so that if you don't get your way, it's personally distressing to you. Active love means, somehow it's not. There we go. Active loving a teenager, both individual and global teenagers, asks us to feed that center circle. So, yeah, levy a curfew, but also forgive the fender bender when they're learning to drive. Insist on no violence and drugs, but also don't get obsessively worried if she gives herself a god-awful haircut. And of course, you don't say anything bad about the kid she has a crush on. So active love is feeding that center circle. So how do we feed the center circle with our elected officials? Well, we confront and protest. We let them know if they're doing good. We expect mistakes because we know that they're human beings. And like that toilet seat that you have the option of obsessing over, don't obsess to the point where you take it personally when you don't get your way. When we're talking about humanity, feeding the center circle means thinking globally and acting locally. And that includes admiring sunsets and picking up litter and enjoying a walk by the river and recycling and all that stuff that you know to do. But mostly to love humanity with all its flaws, just like you love your misbehaving teenager. This is active love. We are part of nature, a teenage part. And nature can be a harsh parent, so it's probably going to be better if we parent ourselves as a global civilization. And we know that parenting works best if it comes from love rather than disgust. Active love breeds active hope. So in romantic relationships, a strong center allows us to have the trust to hope for a future together, a long future together. When it's the government, active citizens allow for a certain, first of all, allows for wiser decisions, but also allows both parties to trust that the other is acting in their best interest. With teens, this huge pile of goodwill in the center circle allows us to trust that they will eventually mature and become functioning adults. But we have to be patient with teenagers because their brains are turning to mush as part of that metamorphosis that they go through that allows a child brain to rewire and reconnect itself to become an adult brain. When we're talking about civilization, look around and you'll see that there's breakdown and chaos everywhere, but there are also glimpses of realignment, rewiring, reconnection, glimpses of maturity everywhere. I feel myself a cog in something turning. Well, maybe it's the time of year, or maybe it's the time of man. I don't know who I am, but life is for learning, she sang. Amazing how that song still resonates today. Each of us is a cog in something turning, a single neuron in the brain of humanity. being reworked, rewired, reconnected as this unstable, guilty civilization we make up matures into adulthood. Yes, Joni, it is the time of man, the Anthropocene. We don't know who we are as a species, but life is for learning. Let us organize against air pollution and enjoy the beauty of a sunset anyway. Let us chuckle at our adolescent behavior and love people anyway. Let us acknowledge our crimes and be proud of our achievements anyway. Let us feed the center circle and let all our partners be whole and different from ourselves. Let us love actively so that we can hope for a more mature wholeness yet to come. Amen.